Okay. Welcome everyone to GER Hub Research Project Writing Live Chat. From all over the world, I welcome you to this live chat. And in today's video, we shall be talking about something very interesting. As you can see in the thumbnail, we are going to be discussing what makes up your literature review. Okay, so we are going to be talking about what makes up your literature review, those components that make up the literature review. Now, why is it important to discuss the literature review? It is because it is a component of the final documentation of your research project. Okay, so if you're writing a research project, somewhere along the line you must incorporate into the final documentation of your work what is called a literature review. Okay, so smash a like on this video and make sure you subscribe. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do that now. Subscribe to the channel. This is the only way you'll be supporting us, supporting our content and helping us to grow, okay, so as to produce more content subsequently. So please smash a like on this video, turn in your comments from all over the world as we begin this live chat. So once again, welcome to GER Hub Research Project Writing Live Chat. Now, as the thumbnail speaks, we will be talking about what makes up your literature review, and I'm going to go into it straight away. Okay, now I'm going to tell you, let me start with number one. So if you have a pen, a paper around you, take note of these things I'm going to be saying on this channel and on this video. Okay, now let's start with answering question number one. According to the thumbnail, what indeed makes up your literature review? I'm going to tell you that these three things, there are three major components of what should make up your literature review, but it is not compulsory. What makes up your literature review are three major components. Now, from field to field, from academic field to academic field, these components may vary, okay? Meaning that in some academic fields, even though these three things could make up your literature review, only one may be required, or only two may be required, or the three of them may be required. So that is the first thing I'm going to say. What makes up your literature review are three things. Now, what are these three components that make up your literature review? Number one, what makes up your literature review could be what we call a conceptual framework. A conceptual framework is number one item that makes up your literature review. Okay? Number two, the second component that makes up your literature review is what is called a theoretical framework. A theoretical framework is the second thing or second component that could make up your literature review. Then comes number three. Now, number three is what we call empirical review, or what is otherwise known as review of related literature. Review of related literature. And some people may even call this particular component I've just mentioned previous research directions. So let's go over it again. Just in case you are joining us live and joining us right now, we are discussing what makes up your literature review. And we have started with answering the very first question in this video. Three things make up your literature review. So if asked the question, what components do you have in your literature review? There are three components that may make up your literature review. And I'm using the word may for a particular reason that I'm going to explain subsequently in this live chat. Number one, what makes up your literature review is what is called a conceptual framework. Number two, another component of your literature review is called the theoretical framework. Okay? And then comes number three, what is called empirical review. Okay? Now, this empirical review could be called alternatively previous research direction or review of related literature. Now, if you look at the thumbnail for this video carefully, you will see that even though these three things make up your literature review, the emphasis in this video, we shall discuss what makes up your literature review. This shall be a series. We shall discuss it on three occasions. Okay, so today we'll begin our very first discussion, and tomorrow and the next we'll discuss the other components. Okay? Now, the second thing I want to say is this. Even as these three things make up your literature review, that is number one, the conceptual framework, number two, the theoretical framework, and then number three, the empirical framework. Take note, it is not compulsory that in your review you must have these three. That is what I want you to know. It is not compulsory that you must have these three. And why am I saying so? What component you use in your work depends on what academic field you are in, what academic field you are writing your research project. Okay, so those in education would usually have the three of them put in their literature review. Those in urban and regional planning may have the three of them incorporated into their literature review. Those in fields like sociology and the rest of them may have those three components required in their literature review. But those in sciences do not structure their literature review along this direction. So even in the sciences, what is actually adopted as a component of the literature review is usually the conceptual framework and probably the empirical review. Okay? Now, two components out of these three I have mentioned that are usually acceptable in the sciences, especially when it comes to especially when it comes to physical sciences, so to say, not the natural sciences. When it comes to physical sciences, for those studying mathematics, statistics, and the likes, what is required is basically the conceptual framework side by side the empirical review, which is otherwise called the review of related literature or previous research direction. So sciences like that do not usually require that a student writing a research project should incorporate a theoretical framework into the review of literature. So what they usually require is just a conceptual framework and then the review of related literature or the empirical review, or otherwise called the previous research direction. So take note, don't go about arguing with your friend or your colleague that in your research project, as it concerns your literature review, these three must be there. No, they mustn't all be there. Okay? So what determines which one you use in the course of writing your research project as it concerns your literature review is the one that concerns your work, the nature of your work demands. So that is the one you should use. Okay? But know in all that these three usually would make up the review of literature or the literature review. Now, that was just a remark. Now let's go to number two, what we are going to be discussing in this video. Now, aside these three components that make up the literature review, the thumbnail in this video talks about conceptual framework. So the emphasis in today's video will be on conceptual framework. Now, it is important for a student writing a research project to know these things, because most students writing a research project do not actually know why the components in their work are the way they are. And some of them get angry with their supervisors and feel stressed by their supervisors when told to do a particular thing this way or a particular thing that way. And they start feeling that their supervisors hate them. Some feel that their supervisors are trying to stress them or frustrate them. No. The supervisor is knowledgeable in what the components of a typical research project should be and would want to guide the students in that manner. So it is simply because the student does not really understand why those things in the research project should be the way they are. That is why the student gets frustrated, thinking the supervisor is trying to frustrate, the supervisor is trying to delay them in the course of writing their research project. So if you are watching this video right now, it is important you do, because it would enlighten you on why the components of your literature review are the way they are. And that brings me to number two. Now, in number two, I want us to draw our attention to the thumbnail. We are discussing, now that we know that the three components that make up the literature review are these three things, we want to discuss the main thing that the thumbnail speaks. That is, we want to discuss the conceptual framework. Now, don't expect in your own research that you must title it conceptual framework. No, it must not be titled conceptual framework. But even when it is not captioned conceptual framework in your work, in your research project, that does not mean you are not doing a conceptual framework. Now, let us start with answering the question, what is a conceptual framework? Let's start from there. So what is a conceptual framework? Okay? Now, a conceptual framework is that component or subheading of your literature review that tells your would-be reader who would pick up your work to go through, be it your supervisor or somebody in future who would go through your work when it is published online, or who would go through your work when he or she stumbles across it in the library where it is documented or kept rather. Now, so it is very important you incorporate your conceptual framework for this particular reason I'm going to tell you now. It is your conceptual framework that looks at every required concept that makes your work what it is, that gives your work an element of structure. Okay? So, let me tell you what that means. Every research project must be structured in concept, meaning that if you are writing on a particular topic, you must know that there are certain concepts in that topic and certain concepts that are related to concepts in that topic that must be discussed to enable whoever reads your work to be guided. Okay? So, why you put a conceptual framework in your work is to ensure that your work has a structure discussing the concepts that your work anchors on. Okay? The concepts that serve as a foundation or a structure for your work should be discussed under what is called a conceptual framework. Now, let me give you an instance. Let us assume that you are writing a project in statistics, okay? And in that project, okay, let's say the topic of that project is a time series analysis of what do you call it? A time series analysis of certain economic variables, the impact of certain economic variables on a particular thing. Now, let's be very particular. Okay, let us restrict the topic, particularly mentioning the 2 or 3 economic variables. Let's say we want to study the impact, a time series analysis of the impact of an economic variable such as inflation rate on some other thing. Okay? Now, how does a student know that that topic is discussed in terms of giving it a structure? You would circle out the keywords in that particular topic. You can't be writing a topic, or you can't be writing on a topic like a time series of inflation rate, or let's say a factor or a variable X. Let's put it that way. Without letting whoever will read your work to know, letting anybody who reads your work to know what time series is. Take note, people, not everybody who will come across your work understands the concept of time series. So, in that sense, time series is a concept that should go into discussion in your work. Another concept that you have just mentioned in that topic is the concept of economic variable, in particular, in this case, inflation rate. So, every concept that is put into that topic must be discussed under what is called the conceptual framework, because one who picks up your work to read must understand the concepts in the topic and the concepts that relate to the topic with a view to getting somewhat a kind of structure in the consumption of what is contained in your work. So, why is conceptual framework important in any research project under the literature review? It is important because whoever reads your work needs to know the concepts that make up your work in terms of structure. Okay? You need to discuss those concepts in the topic of your work and those that are related to them. Now, having said that about why it is important to write or incorporate a conceptual framework into your research project, let us now answer question number 3. In what part of your work, in what topic or what heading or what chapter of your work should you have a conceptual framework? It is in the second chapter of your work, the literature review. So it is in the literature review, which in most cases constitutes the second chapter of your work, that you should write into it what is called the conceptual framework. Okay, so answering the question, where should I put the conceptual framework in my study, in my research documentation? Conceptual framework should be put in your chapter 2. And what is the caption for your chapter 2? It is captioned literature review. Okay, now that brings me to number 4, and where I'm going to end this short and brief discussion. Okay, now we have answered question number 1. What are the 3 things that make up your literature review? I am saying all of them, the 3 of them. Your theoretical framework is there, your empirical framework is there, and your conceptual framework. But because this video emphasizes conceptual framework, in question number 2, we have answered the question, what is conceptual framework? Okay? And in question number 3, we have answered the question, what about the conceptual framework should you know? You should know that the conceptual framework should be found in the chapter 2 of your work, that is the literature review. Now comes number 4. Number 4 should now tell you that there is a structure, there is a pattern with which you should write your conceptual framework. Now, let me emphasize this. Please. Take note that you must not it must not carry a subheading conceptual framework. Meaning that, for instance, in the sciences, unlike the education guys, unlike those in humanities, or unlike those in sociology or social sciences, where they actually would head it conceptual framework. In the sciences, we don't call our framework. Especially in the physical sciences, you rarely would hear someone in the physical sciences capturing their literature review, that component of their literature review conceptual framework. In the sciences, we go straight into discussing the subheadings as the concepts. So instead of capturing it conceptual framework in the sciences, we will just go into discussing time series as a component. We will go into discussing inflation rate as a component. We will go into discussing the variable x as a component. But put together, whether you are discussing time series, you are discussing variable x, or you are discussing inflation rate, put together, all you are doing, whether you caption it that way or not, is discussing conceptual framework. So take note, conceptual framework must not be the caption. Okay, it mustn't be the caption. It is not compulsory, it must be the caption. Whether you caption it as conceptual framework or not, take note, you are still discussing the conceptual framework. Okay, now please drop a comment in the comment section below. If you have any question for me, I remain Dr. Hussein. Please put a comment in the comment section below. After now, if you have a comment or you have a question, please put it in the comment section below, and I will answer those questions subsequently. Okay, till the next class, where we shall be discussing something else related to the literature review, take note, you should subscribe to the channel. Please subscribe to the channel, drop a like on this video, and ensure to share it across the world. Until that time, stay blessed. I'll be seeing you in the next class. Thank you very much.